Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Conservative, not bitter indeed, my friends. Hour 2 of today's program. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit as we get into this new hour. There's two things I want to try to get to. I'm going to try. I know Yoda's words, do or do not, there is no try. I am going to do my level best to get to both of these things. First, I want to talk about a bill that Governor Katie Hobbs, the Democrat governor of the great state of Arizona, she vetoed this bill. I want to talk about this because the media, the same media that we've been talking about in the previous hour of this program, is misleading and deceiving, convoluting what this bill really did. And I want to talk about that, number one. I also want to, you would have heard me if you listened to hour number 1. Shame on you if you didn't. I'm kidding. You can listen to the podcast or go to Rumble and catch anything that you missed. But EPA, Lee Zeldin, who heads up the EPA, he confronted a New York Times journalist about some of the things that they were saying about there being no evidence of waste fraud, and abuse in the EPA. So I want to talk about that. There's a lot of other stuff that I want to get to as well. You know what? I'm going to do one thing first because I mentioned this at the top of last hour. And this is something I just want to mention quickly, and we can move on. But this is Easter. We just passed Easter weekend. Resurrection Sunday was a couple of days ago. And so I want to reference, I referenced this, I want to talk about this briefly, and then we'll move on to this bill in Arizona. Headline here, Breitbart, actor John Cusack compares Donald Trump to the killers of Jesus Christ in Easter message. So John Cusack goes to X, formerly known as Twitter, on Easter Sunday, later in the evening. I don't know if he just rolled out of the rack or what, but it says this: Happy Easter. Christ was tortured and executed as a political calculation by the Trumps of the day. Happy Easter. That's what he wrote. These people are blinded with rage. You know, the truth is, it's, as with most things regarding the message and story of God, of Christ, there are layers to the story of Christ, the story of anytime God's involved, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, it is profound and deep. There's multiple ways to look at who, quote unquote, was responsible for the torture and execution of Jesus. If you just want to look at it on a superficial level, you can say that the Roman authorities allowed it. They were the ones that were engaged in the flogging. They were the ones who were using the cat of nine tails. They were the ones who drove the spikes into the hands of Jesus. They were ultimately responsible for the torture and execution of Jesus. You could also say, well, the reason they were put in that position was because the Jewish leaders of the day, and I want to be clear here, when people hear this, I want to make sure you hear this correctly. I'm not blaming every Jew for this, every person who's Jewish for this at the time. This was specifically a group of religious leaders, part of the Sanhedrin, who had a make-believe trial because they wanted Jesus dead. They wanted Jesus dead for some time. It's the reason that Jesus kept saying, my hour is not yet come. It's the reason why after Jesus would heal people, he would say, don't tell anyone about this, because he knew that the more attention he gained from the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees of the day that were in that group, they were going to start calling for his death. And it was an appointed time, right? It had to coincide. Of course, God could have protected that. Nothing could have been done to take Jesus short of his appointed time. But Jesus was trying to protect it, and he was the Passover lamb. I mean, this is the symbolism and the importance of what happened with Easter being aligned with Passover, and Jesus being the Passover lamb, and God delivering his people from their sin, just like he, through Moses, delivered his people through bondage from Egypt. I mean, the parallels and similarities are profound to levels that are almost incomprehensible. So you could say that the Jewish leaders of the day crucified Jesus. But folks, let me get down to the bare bottom of this. The truth is, Jesus was tortured and executed because of all of us, because of our sin, because of his decision to stand in as the atonement for that sin, as the payment for that sin. He took the wrath of God so that you and I wouldn't. It was love that held him to that cross, not nails. Folks, he could have done, the Bible says that he could have called on legions of angels to pull him down, protect him, get him off of the cross. I mean, he was God in the flesh. He only did this because, well, he stayed on the cross because he allowed it. The Bible says, because of the joy set before him, endured the cross and scorned its shame. He chose to stay there and was tortured for our transgressions. We all, John Cusack, you, me, everybody listening to my voice, we all played a role in that because of our rebellion and our sin. And I just wanted to address this. John Cusack trying to make it political. It's silly, of course, to try to do that. I don't know why. I do know why. I hope John Cusack is a follower of Jesus. But the truth is here, this message is very, very wrong. Ultimately, what put Christ on that cross was me and you, my friends, was our sin. And I just wanted to address that. So, before I move on to the other part of what I promised you that I would get to, at least the first thing here, the second one I'm going to try, I want to start by talking about this bill that Katie Hobbs vetoed in Arizona as governor. Before I do that, let me tell you, we're getting to the end of your opportunity to get a lifetime membership to the Inner Circle. I'm excited about this, by the way. The Inner Circle is going to launch a little bit later this spring, and for a limited time, you can be a lifetime member of the Inner Circle. This is for founding members. It's $99, one-time investment to be a part of the Inner Circle. You're going to be part of what we do behind the scenes in that community. It's going to involve exclusive content. It's going to involve live video chats with people who are part of the community, with me as well. Some other things that we're building there, and you can be an integral part of that. So if you're interested, you can go to toddhuffshow.com/join, toddhuffshow.com/join to find out more information to secure your spot today, or you can text the word join if you prefer to 317-210-2830. Again, text the word join to 317-210-2830. toddhuffshow.com/join is where you can go directly as well. So there you go. That opportunity is coming to a close here. All right. So let's get to what I told you we were going to get to here today, which is Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs, governor of Arizona, Democrat governor. Headline here, Life Zet. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs vetoes bill that protects American citizens from illegal aliens. Now, I want to go through this because this is important. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs has vetoed Senate Bill 1164. This is, again, in Arizona. This is a state bill. This is not a federal bill in Washington, D.C. This is a bill in Arizona. The bill would have required state and local law enforcement to cooperate, hear that word, cooperate, with federal immigration and customs enforcement, that's ICE, in the identification, detention, and deportation of individuals residing in the country illegally. The legislation, commonly referred to as the ICE Act, ICE, also included language to prohibit any municipality, that's a city or town in Arizona, from adopting so-called sanctuary policies, local ordinances or practices that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. So basically the law says you have to cooperate with ICE. So why is this an issue? This is an issue because of sanctuary policies, sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies. And people who are from these blue states, these blue cities, who have sanctuary city policies, sanctuary state policies, basically argue that, look, we're not going to do the work of the federal government. They can't tell us what to do. We're not going to cooperate. In fact, they go out of their way sometimes. They go out of their way if they know somebody is going to be wanted by ICE, they go out of their way to get them out of their facility without telling ICE. All the cooperation means is that you communicate with. There's no intent to have Arizona go door knocking. ICE, it's ICE's job to customs and, border patrol. It's their jobs to secure the border. Deportation is not the job of the state. But if the state gets somebody in its custody and they know that that person is not legally supposed to be here, what's the burden that says simply alert ICE? Send them a text message. Give them a phone call. Hey, I think we've got somebody here that you've been looking for. Are you looking for this person? Seems like you might want to know about their whereabouts. We arrested them. So think about this. They're not being arrested. These folks are not being arrested for illegal, their status. They're being arrested for something else. So remember when Trump says his policy, his agenda is to deport people who are illegal aliens who are creating problems. They're criminals. They've created, they've been alleged to have committed crimes. They've been alleged gang members. They've been involved in some sketchy stuff. Now, this doesn't mean in every circumstance that you're going to go through the trials and to say that you've been, you've been convicted of these things. If you've been arrested for these things and ICE knows you're here illegally, then why can't they deport you? And why would, as a city, or a state, would you say, you would tell your law enforcement to specifically not communicate that? Shh, don't tell them. Don't tell them that we've got anybody here who is an illegal alien. Shh, don't tell the federal government. Don't tell the feds. Got to keep it secret. We got to release them into the public so maybe we can arrest them next week for another crime. Maybe next time it'll be violent. What is wrong? What is the burden here? No one's asking again for you to round people up. You have them in your custody. Why not communicate? What is the big deal? So the legislation says there's going to be cooperation, and the legislation also says there's not going to be a municipality, a city in the state of Arizona, who's going to have policies that contradict this. You can't have policies that say you're going to provide sanctuary to people who are here illegally. So back to the article. The Republican-backed bill passed through the Arizona legislature, where the GOP currently holds a 2/3 majority in both chambers. That's important to note because her veto sets up, the article says here, the potential for a legislative override vote, which would require support from the same 2/3 majority to succeed. So just like on the federal level, you have Congress that passes the bill. Both houses of Congress have to pass an identical bill. They sign it at the federal level. This happens at the state level with state legislatures and governors as well. You send the bill to the head of the executive branch. At the federal level, it's the president. At the state level, it's the governor. And you say, hey, you got to sign this bill into law or you veto the bill. Them's the choices. So you make your choice she chooses to veto it, the House and the Senate can actually have another vote to override that veto. And since they have 2/3, that's the requirement in most cases. That's what it is federally. I don't know if all 50 states have that same exact requirement, but that's typically the case. It might be in all 50 states. But the veto override vote is 2/3. So they have the votes. This might be what happens. We will see how this plays out. But Katie Hobbs sent a letter explaining to the legislature why she vetoed the bill. And I'm going to read, it's very short. It says, regarding Senate Bill 1164, immigration laws, local enforcement. President Peterson, this is William Peterson, President of the Senate. Today I vetoed Senate Bill 1164. Arizonans, not Washington, D.C. politicians, must decide what's best for Arizona. This is what I particularly want to talk about, but I'm going to read the rest of this stupid letter. You and I both disagreed with the previous administration's immigration policies, referencing Biden, and we may both disagree with the next administration's immigration policies. I have worked productively with the federal government to secure our borders, stopping fentanyl at our ports of entry through Task Force SAFE, disrupting cartel operations within the Operation Desert Guardian, and working across all levels of government to keep communities safe with the Border Coordination Office. I will continue to work with the federal government on true border security, but we should not force state and local officials to take marching orders from Washington, D.C. This is not what this bill does. This is just amazing to me. The amount of mental gymnastics and I guess just metaphorical footwork necessary to dance around the truth here. Several years ago, when Obama was president, you've heard me talk about this on here. Several years ago, when Obama was president and Jan Brewer was governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer tried to enforce the border law that the Obama administration was completely neglecting to do. They weren't doing this. They weren't. Folks, look, the proof is in the pudding. This border has become suddenly and historically, in an unprecedented way, secure in ways that it had never been before. And the previous administrations, including the last one with Joseph Robinette bribery, Barack Obama, even George W. Bush. This goes back to, listen, Reagan had negotiated, I've been through this lots of times. Reagan had negotiated a deal with Democrats. We will provide, this is back in the 80s. If you're here, we'll give you a pathway, amnesty. But the other part of this is we have to secure the border. Well, the amnesty part was granted, but the border was never secured. We've been fighting this battle ever since then, until now. The president, without any question, has secured the border. Now, that's problem number one. As I've shared on here repeatedly, this is like being out in a lake or in the ocean or wherever in a boat. The boat is taking on water. The first thing you have to do is stop more water from coming on board the boat. It will sink the boat. It will sink the boat at some point. At some point, there is enough water that will enter the ship. If it keeps coming on board at some point, and maybe you've got sophisticated, mechanisms underneath the ship to keep the water within a certain section. But if it continues to get into the ship through some means, it will eventually bring the ship down. And so the first order of business is to stop more water from coming on. That's, in this analogy, that is stopping more people from crossing our border illegally. And by the way, if what I'm reading in the stack of stuff and in the news is correct, there's a lot of people who are now self-deporting. They're self-deporting. I don't have time probably to get to that, but people are now self-deporting. So I would say That would be like the water that got onto the boat, instead of waiting for the bucket to bail it out, if it just jumped out of the boat on its own. That's what we've got going on in this country today. That's first step, secure the border. Stop the water from coming in. Now, we have water on the ship, water in the boat. We've got to begin getting the water out of the boat. And so Trump has said, his administration has said, that we're going to start with the people who are the ones who are the most violent, the biggest threats, the ones who are getting arrested, the ones who have criminal histories, the ones who have been violent. By the way, if you're here illegally, just for the record, if you are truly here illegally, you can, by law, be deported. That is the law. So in the analogy, there's not a part of the water that's on the boat that can't be bailed legally. Now, they have due process or whatever. They can, there's claims of asylum, all this stuff. I'm not saying there's not any exclusion or anything like that. What I'm saying that is, if you are here illegally, if you've broken the law to get into this country, you are not by law allowed to be here. That's as pure and simple as this gets. And so when she says here that Arizonans, not Washington, D.C. politicians, must decide what's best for Arizona, what is she referencing here? Because that's the law. If someone is arrested and they are here illegally, the law says that they can go at least through the deportation process, have their deportation hearing and all that. Why? What does this have to do with the will of Arizonans? This is the law. What does this have to do with any sort of interpretation of anything? She says she'll continue to work with the federal government on true border security. We're not talking about border security. We're now talking about phase 2. We've stopped the flow of more people, or in the analogy, more water onto the ship. We are now talking about what to do with the water that's already in the boat, the water that wasn't supposed to be there. Now we're enforcing the laws on the books to deal with that. What is she talking about when she says the state of Arizona, should not force state and local officials to take marching orders from Washington, D.C.? What does that mean? It's the federal law. They're not there being told, hey, you got to go arrest this person and deport them. No, you have them in your custody. All you have to do is send them a message. This is nonsense what she's talking about. She is trying to do her level best to allow people who are not supposed to be here by law to be here. And I leave it up to you. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do that? There's not a lot of options. Quick timeout's in order, my friends. Sit tight. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. What would be the reason? Why would you want people to be here illegally? Why would you want to tell your law enforcement agency? Think about what she's saying. The amount of work she's talking about, the marching orders that she says are coming from D.C. politicians, is to say, hey, pick up the phone, send an email, send a text. I mean, we're dealing with the federal government, so send a fax, send a carrier pigeon to ICE if you've got someone that you think ICE is looking for. If you find someone, I mean, what is the work? What are the marching orders? None of this makes any sense. They're not giving up their authority to enforce the law of Arizona. They're not becoming federal agents. They're told simply to cooperate. You know, it is amazing to me. I'm old enough to remember 9/11, right? And one of the lessons of 9/11 was that we had all these federal FBI, CIA, and they weren't communicating with each other. Because you look back and you're like, how do you have guys come into this country who weren't supposed to be here, who had all sorts of red flags? They took flight training classes, and when it came time to learn how to land, they said, I don't need to learn how to land a plane. What? That's not important to me. Does that not send off red flags? Flight instructors, I think, were reporting this to people, but it didn't get to everybody who needed to know the information. And what happened as a result? What happened as a result? We had the deaths of nearly 3,000 Americans, 2,900 and some odd number of Americans who died on 9/11. I'm not saying necessarily that information would have prevented it. I'm just saying that it certainly would have helped. It certainly would have put us on the right path to connect some dots. Maybe if all that information was in one place, then they wouldn't have been able to pull it off. Maybe everybody would have known who they were looking for. Maybe they could have connected the dots, put the pieces of the puzzle together, whatever, prior to what was initiated, what was actually the attack that was launched that morning of September 11th, that Tuesday, beautiful Tuesday morning, until all hell rained down by these radical Islamo-fascists. I mean, why can't we say, okay, let's take those lessons and say, if the state of Arizona arrests somebody that simply needs to be deported, I mean, what if this was a violent person? What if there was other information about this person that isn't known because their identity is kind of checkered with the way that they're not here legally, so what makes us think that we have a complete picture of that person, who they are, what they've done, that sort of thing? What if they've got a history of violence? What if they're involved in human trafficking? Should you go to the extreme of sheltering that person, of hiding that person, of making sure that the government doesn't know that you have this person into custody? We're talking about a phone call, Katie, or a carrier pigeon in the case of the federal or state governments, an email to people living in the 21st century, a text. Heck, maybe you could just message them on Facebook. I don't know. There's lots of ways I can think of. I don't understand how this is taking marching orders from anybody. It is federal law. And going back to Jan Brewer, when she was governor, she was told she couldn't enforce, she couldn't, the state could not enforce the law. It was the job of the federal government. But then the federal government didn't enforce it. So now the states left dealing with the reality, the impact. You know, the impact across this country of illegal immigration is astronomical. It's hard to calculate, candidly. But especially along the border states, the impact in Arizona, the impact in Texas and New Mexico, and California. Look at California as just an absolute just disaster. Did you see, by the way, I don't have time to talk about this, it's in the stack of stuff. I don't know what's going to happen with the Olympics. Have you followed this story at all? Have you seen this, Oz? The Olympics? LA hosts the 2028 Olympics. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm not sure if there's going to be an Olympic Games. Sponsors are pulling out. People who are on the committee are dropping off. They don't think they have enough money. Projects that are supposed to happen haven't happened. They got 3 years for this thing. It's got a little over 3 years to get this thing ready, and I don't know what's going to happen. It's a state that's run by a governor that's insane. The state's insane. The governor's insane. I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know what's going to happen. So you got to factor that leadership into the way that they've dealt with illegal immigration, creating a sanctuary state. It is a mess in California. You think about the number of illegal aliens living in California, and that'll boggle the mind. So, but those states have felt the impact most severely. It's had the strongest, the biggest impact. What does she mean taking marching orders from Washington, D.C.? That's certainly not how any reasonable person would look at that, my friends. All right, so I want to stop there on that. I just wanted to alert you, inform you of what was going on in the state of Arizona. She's vetoed the bill. It looks like there's enough Republicans, or there are on paper enough Republicans to override this veto. Common sense and sanity would demand that these Republican senators and congressmen in that state would override her veto, making Senate Bill 1164 the law of the land, which does not allow the federal government to give marching orders to the state. It creates a responsibility of the workers, the law enforcement there, to communicate some very basic information about people who are not supposed to be here by law. What is the big deal? Cry me a river, Governor Katie Hobbs. Did I say Holmes? Oh, I do that. It's Hobbs. Katie Holmes. You know who Katie Holmes is? She was married to Tom Cruise. Katie Hobbs. My goodness. I just now caught that right as I was saying it at the end. If I said Holmes, forgive me. See, I do. That's misspeaking, by the way. That's misspeaking. That's not, I don't come on here and say, burn down a Tesla dealership and then say I misspoke. That's not misspeaking. That's perpetrating or encouraging evil to happen. That's not misspeaking. Misspeaking is what I just did there. I can't believe I did that. Apologies, my friends. Even the most seasoned professionals amongst us will screw up from time to time. There you go. So there's for those of you that are keeping score, there's a mistake made by yours truly. Really quickly, my friends, let me remind you, MyPillow has a large allotment of sheets that were earmarked for big box stores again, but the box stores didn't go through with the order for whatever reason. Now they're going to pass those savings, MyPillow passing those on to you. You can go to their website, mypillow.com, and get wholesale price for the Giza Dream Sheets, the Percale bed sheets. You can get those, and you can also get some free shipping options. I still can't get over what I said there. Free shipping options available for you as well. This allotment is not going to last long. Once the sheets are gone, the pricing is going to be gone as well. MyPillow.com, promo code Todd, get you these special prices. Or if you prefer, 800-615-2015. You can call that number and place your order there, 800-615-2015. All right, so looking at the clock here, just have a couple of minutes left this segment. I told you I'd get to this. I told you I would try. Do or do not, there is no try. We are doing here today. Daily Signal, dailysignal.com, EPA Administrator confronts New York Times reporter for claiming he had no evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, so this is the EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. He confronts the New York Times. The New York Times, the media is out there saying there's no evidence. There's no evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse in the EPA. Do you believe that, by the way? Do you believe that there's no evidence? Zero. No evidence. Evidence, by the way, is something that supports the claim of waste, fraud, and abuse in this case. Evidence simply means there are examples of things that have happened that should at least make us ask some questions. That's all evidence means. Evidence just means, hey, there's some things that have happened that look a little concerning. Looks like you may be being a little bit wasteful. Maybe there's some fraud going on. Maybe there's some abuse going on. You can answer. You can answer for the evidence. There might be an explanation for all of the evidence, some of the evidence. There might be an explanation for none of it, which candidly is what I think that the left fears here, is that there is no explanation for any of it. And so they're just saying that there's no evidence. There's no evidence. If there's no evidence, we don't have to talk about the evidence. What do you mean evidence? Just like they say there's no evidence that President Bribery was engaged in some very sketchy things. Of course there's evidence. There's lots of evidence of this on Hunter Biden's laptop. Tons of evidence. There's other forms of evidence too. You can find a lot of that information in the book entitled Laptop from Hell, but that's another discussion for another day. There is evidence of this. Does the evidence have an explanation? Does it not? We'll talk about that in the time we have remaining in the next segment, but I've got to take a time out, my friends. Sit tight. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I asked Oz, why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you correct me? I'm using the wrong name for Katie Hobbs. She said I started to, and then you corrected. So I think I must have been bobbing and weaving there. Using the right name on some instances, the wrong names on the other instances. I find it comical a little bit. Can't believe I did that. We've got a daughter. She's got friends. 3 friends. This is the names of the friends. This is a recipe for disaster for me. There's a Rayleigh, a Riley, and a Kylie. Rayleigh, Riley, and Kylie. if names sound alike or if visually look alike, and I start talking, especially if I'm talking about something else and just inserting the name, it is super easy for me to say the wrong name. So forgive me for that, my friends. Really quickly, too, by the way, before I play this soundbite from Lee Zeldin of the EPA. Are you tired of having your hard-earned money support businesses that then turn around and support causes that you vehemently oppose, leftist causes? Because, friends, that happens today. We buy things from a company, they take that money, support leftist candidates, leftist causes. That's why we created Freedom Marketplace. It's a free searchable directory of businesses that share your conservative values, businesses that have vowed to not support leftist candidates, not support leftist causes. There's no strings attached here. It's totally and completely free to you. Just good, patriotic businesses pushing in the same direction that you are. Check it out today, freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. Liberty and business for all. This is, by the way, something that we operate here at the Todd Huff Show as well. freedommarketplace.net. All right, that being said, let me get here, last segment of the program. Let's get to Lee Zeldin, as much of this as I can, where he's going to be challenging this reporter for the New York Times. Hey, there's evidence. Why do you insist on saying there's no evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse when there clearly is? And why isn't it playing here? Bear with me here. Tells me it's supposed to be there. Okay, let me try this. I got two feeds of this. Let me try this one. It's not coming up on either one. Hold on here. So, Lee Zeldin, again, the issue at hand here is that he is dealing with people in the media who are deceptively saying that there's no waste, there's no fraud, there's no abuse at the EPA. He says that's not true. Why don't you simply report the facts? It is not connecting. I don't know what's going on here today. Let's disconnect and reconnect. All right, so here's the bigger issue. Whether I can play this, I'm going to try one more time or not to play this. Yeah, it's just not cooperating with me today. But Lee Zeldin basically confronts this reporter of the New York Times and says, look, there is evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. What this reporter kept saying is, well, what, has a judge said that it's evidence? What do you mean a judge? What is going on to where you're concerned about, thinking that there's a judge that has to say that there's evidence? Why does it matter what a judge thinks is evidence? What about the American people? Here's the evidence that we've found to say that there's waste and fraud and abuse. And I'm sorry, this soundbite isn't going to play. But we found this evidence. What do you, the American people, think about this? What do you, the American taxpayer, think about this? Lee Zeldin says it's my job to find dollars that we're burning here. We're wasting. There is evidence of this. You say, New York Times, you say that there's no evidence. You don't want to talk about the evidence. Question my evidence. Look into what I say. Maybe some of it has an answer. Maybe there's an explanation for some of this. But don't sit here and say that there's no evidence, because there is, in fact, evidence. By the way, to go back to the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, there is evidence that there is some very questionable things happening between the administration, Hunter Biden, and foreign actors. 100% there is evidence. Maybe there's an explanation for this. I would love someone just to tell me regarding Hunter Biden what he was getting paid for. What was all of these massive sums of money going back and forth for? By the way, thinking about that, did you see Hunter Biden's art? Remember, the guy was making bazillions off of his art, little Pablo Picasso over there. You see that his art suddenly plummeted in value? What explanation do you have for that? What explanation exists to say that there is that Hunter Biden's art plunges in value? May I state the obvious? The obvious answer is often the answer that is correct. The answer that says, well, once his father was out of the White House, people stopped having an interest in funneling money to the family through this make-believe art that has no value, where they try to tell us it had absolutely massive amounts of value. It did not. By the way, the only people that are going to buy this art would be people who have lots of money, who think like me at some point, just to buy it, to put it on the wall, to talk about these things when friends come over in the future. There's no real value in what Hunter Biden created with his art. In fact, that's the safe bet, is to say that it's not going to be worth a diddly darn thing. You know, for most artists, once they, the true value of their art is often once they die. I think Hunter Biden's art's going to shoot up in value. His value was when he was alive and able to connect people with the president, allegedly. I'm out of time here. Gotta go. SDJ.